Welcome back, Focus Learners! Today, we are unlocking a fascinating cognitive secret, one that designers, developers, and even doctors are actively using to shape exactly how you remember the world. It's called the peak end rule, and what it proves is that our memories, well, they aren't perfectly recorded video files. They are heavily, meticulously engineered highlight reels. The way you remember a new product, a hospital visit, or even a family vacation has been totally structured behind the scenes. Okay, let's dive into this and see exactly how it works.
Here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll start with the memory illusion, look at the anatomy of the peak end, see engineering real-world experiences in action, tackle some ethical dilemmas in practice, and wrap up with the ROI of memory.
Kicking things off with Section 1, the memory illusion. Let's look at why we actually remember what we do.
Why on earth does a single good moment completely erase a terrible day? Think about your last trip to a major theme park. You likely spent, up to 8 hours just sweating in the sun, standing in incredibly crowded, painfully slow-moving queues, just dealing with absolute physical exhaustion. And yet, months later you look back on it fondly as this magical, fantastic trip. Why doesn't your brain just accurately average out those 8 grueling hours of misery?
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the split between our two selves. On the left side, we have the experiencing self. Now, this is the part of you that evaluates your life in real time, taking a constant average of every passing moment. But here's the catch. Your brain doesn't actually store that average. Instead, the remembering self operates using this fascinating glitch called duration neglect. It literally ignores how long an experience lasted. It judges the whole event based entirely on its emotional spikes, the peaks, and how it concludes. That's the whole shebang.
Moving right along to Section 2, the anatomy of the peak end, where we'll break down the cognitive frameworks behind this.
So, formally, the peak end rule is a cognitive bias where people judge an experience largely based on how they felt at its emotional peak and its conclusion, rather than the total average. But it's important to know that organizations don't just guess where these peaks are going to happen. They actively map them using what's called the 3-layer discovery stack. They monitor behavioral signals, so things like support escalations or drop-off points. They analyze memory signals by digging into customer interviews to see what stories stand out. And they use moment-level measures to capture real-time emotions right at transition points. This allows them to pinpoint the absolute perfect moments right for engineering.
Once they map those out, they deploy strategic frameworks, like Yu-Kai Chou's brilliant 5-step Octalysis playbook used in behavioral design. Now, steps 1 through 3 are all about brutal honesty. You're plotting the current emotional intensity and grading the existing peak and ending. But step 4, that is the secret sauce. Select core drive spike. Designers intentionally inject a behavioral force, like epic meaning or social influence, to create this dramatic, artificial emotional peak right in the middle of a process. Then, in step 5, they deliberately design a highly rewarding final impression. This anchors that positive memory permanently in the user's mind.
Let's move to Section 3 and see how this builds. This is engineering real-world experiences, the behavioral matrix in action.
Take IKEA, for example. We all know that walking through IKEA is basically navigating a highly structured retail labyrinth. It's physically tiring, and for the experiencing self, it's largely a neutral to negative journey. So how do they salvage it? They place a food counter directly past the cash registers, offering extremely inexpensive hot dogs and ice cream. That highly positive, super affordable final impression literally overwrites the exhaustion of the maze. You walk to your car with a lasting memory of immense value.
Disney parks take this to a spectacular extreme using climax architecture. They know you're tired. They know the crowds were frustrating. So they don't just let you walk out to the parking lot in silence. No way. They blast massive, highly emotional fireworks into the night sky. This serves as a towering positive peak and an end state that forcefully overshadows the physical drain of the day, leaving families with this artificially sustained, magical memory.
And hey, this happens constantly right on your phone too, through digital micro-interventions. Think about Duolingo throwing massive, colorful street confetti at you after a repetitive language drill just to make it feel highly rewarding. Or Uber. They recognized that waiting for a ride was a high-anxiety negative peak, so they gamified the wait screen with a little moving car icon to totally change your perception of time. And MailChimp knows hitting send on a massive email campaign is terrifying, so they give you an animation of their mascot offering a high five. They are turning moments of high friction and anxiety into immensely rewarding positive peaks. But wait, what happens when a service actually breaks? Because of what's called negativity dominance, bad peaks hit our memories way harder than good ones. That's exactly why organizations use an emotional offset strategy. A generic "thank you for your patience" just isn't going to cut it here. If there is a billing dispute, they have to mitigate that peak with instant verification and design the end with an immediate financial adjustment and a goodwill credit. If there's an implementation delay, they must offer radical transparency and finish with a quick win deliverable. You absolutely have to engineer a high-value resolution to successfully offset the powerful memory of a failure.
Which brings us to Section 4, Ethical Dilemmas in Practice. It's time to look at the dark side of memory. Consider this really profound question. Is it permissible to intentionally prolong a patient's physical suffering solely to alter their memory? In clinical medicine, researchers actually found that if a doctor leaves an uncomfortable instrument, like a colonoscopy, stationary in a patient for just an extra bit of time at the end of a procedure, the patient remembers the entire experience as less painful. The pain tapers off so that final memory is softer. But is doing that ethical? This creates a massive bioethical conflict. On one side, we have beneficence. Proponents argue this manipulation is a good thing because a less painful memory means the patient is much more likely to return for future life-saving cancer screenings. But on the other side is non-maleficence. Critics argue it's the deliberate infliction of unnecessary physical suffering with absolutely no immediate diagnostic value. Plus, there is a huge informed consent dilemma. If you tell the patient you're tricking their memory, the psychological trick completely fails. And clinicians can't just rely on the doctrine of double effect here, because that extra pain isn't just a side effect, it is the direct cognitive mechanism being used to alter the memory.
We actually see a very similar cognitive tension in social work. The peak-end rule, combined with recency bias, heavily dictates how clients describe chronic trauma. A brief, recent period of calm can cause a client to feel that things are fine now, which completely overshadows a long chronology of past harm or institutional neglect. This creates a really tough professional tension. Social workers have to think longitudinally about cumulative risk, while the clients themselves are evaluating their reality using the immediate emotional heuristics of their recent ending. Let's bring it back to the practical side with Section 5, the ROI of memory. Here's the business case.
16%. So, the crucial point is this. Referred customers have a 16% higher lifetime value than customers acquired through standard marketing. When a brand like Chewy sends unexpected condolence flowers when a customer's pet passes away, they are taking a terrible life event and turning it into an incredibly powerful positive peak. This drives viral advocacy. Optimizing your peak and end moments doesn't just make people smile, it generates massive financial returns by turning everyday customers into highly valuable referrers.
And the peak-end rule heavily dictates pricing strategy too. Research shows that consumers anchor their expectations entirely on a weighted average of the highest price they've observed and the most recent price. This means frequent deep discounts are actually incredibly dangerous. A deep discount creates this highly memorable low peak. And once that low peak anchors in their memory, consumers become permanently resistant to your standard pricing, which steadily erodes your brand value over time. So, to tie this whole explainer together, we've got 3 core operational imperatives. First, design for memory, not for averages. You have to stop spreading your budgets thinly just to make every single touchpoint mediocre. Instead, invest heavily in one singular peak and a flawless ending. Second, prioritize the taper over the climax in pain management. Smoothing out negative experiences gradually creates a far better memory. And third, always enforce ethical boundaries in behavioral design. And this brilliantly illustrates why programs like the SUE employee onboarding redesign are so successful. They are designing specifically for the memory.
I'll leave you with this final, provocative thought to chew on. How are your own memories engineered today? Because once you understand the invisible architecture of the peak-end rule, you're going to start noticing it absolutely everywhere, in the software you use, the stores you browse, and the services you rely on. Thank you so much for joining us to unpack these fascinating sources. Keep analyzing the world around you, focused learners, and we'll catch you on the next explainer.